Good day, everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day. So today we will be continuing the previous discussion we had around fundamentals for Platform Dev 1. So let me recap what we have done in our last episode. We talked about basic introduction to Salesforce. We briefly touched about Sales Cloud, Service Cloud. We had a look at Dev Console, and then we talked about Apex, briefly talked about Visualforce, and a bit about Lightning Component. And we looked at a bit of the differences, and we played around with the code to look at the collections and how to write the classes, right? So today we will continue on top of it and explain you a little bit more detail so that you can get a clear understanding, because it's very important for you to understand Apex, because if you're a developer, right, you'll be doing a lot of Apex stuff. So Apex, as I said, is an object-oriented programming language, right? It is case insensitive. So if you are from C# background, you might find it a bit strange, but if you're from someone like from a Delphi background, right? So you will find it a bit easier because Delphi is a case insensitive language as well, right? Or if you're from Python or other language, you will find yourself comfortable even if you know one object-oriented programming, right? So we talked about so different data types, and we said, as I mentioned, that we have integer, we have Boolean, we have string, we have S-object, which is like all the objects in Salesforce, right? Customer standard, you can call it as an S-object, right? So if you declare a param as an object, you can pass it as an account, or you can pass it as a custom object. So we have enumeration as well, like similar to .NET. So this is the syntax, you can, so, and this is how you get the ordinal for enumeration. And so this is pretty basic stuff. So, and then we have collections, as I mentioned, that we have list, and we have sets. Sets are, you cannot store a duplicate value inside the set. And then we have maps, which is like a dictionary. So this is how we define list, right? And so as I showed you here, so this is a basic class, and if you wanted to define a list, say for instance list of string, you define this way, and let's say demo str equals to, then you define new. I hope you guys know what I'm doing. I'm allocating a memory for this specific object, right? Because if you don't do that, if you do this, right, and then if you say let me give an example, public static void display, I'm writing a demo static method. So if you do something like that, demo str, all right, dot add, it will fail because this object is not instantiated. So whatever, and so you got to do to instantiate this object. I know, I understand that if you're new to programming, you might find this concept a bit strange, but I expect that if you are someone applying for this certification, I expect you to have some basic understanding of a programming language. If not, I would encourage you to study object-oriented concepts at least. So, right? So something like that you can do. So, and so this is about the list you can do, and also I've talked about in my previous lecture about how to debug, how to do from anonymous blog, how you can test it, right? You can go here and you can write your code here, you can test it, that demo class.display, right? And you can also look at the log files and you can see the execution plan, right? And so this is how about the list, and you can initialize the list with three records, right? So, and then, or you can actually populate it directly from using a SOCL. So this is you might find this query a bit strange if you're from a different programming background, but this is very easy. Once you get a hang of it, right, you will find it very easy to use it. So this is what it's actually doing, is that it's saying, okay, give me the list of right, okay, let me copy this one, right? So let me show you what I meant by that. So let's forget about this one, okay? And so this what I'm saying is that, okay, give me the list of a name and ID from this account. So it could be 1, it could be 10, or we don't know, right? Depending upon the records you have in your object. So if you wanted to limit it, you can do limit 1. That means you only get 1. So, and you can do something like that. So it's always one thing I wanted to tell you guys: if you're writing a code, right, it's always good to check, like if there is a just look at the size, right? If the size is greater than 0, then you can do something like this, right? My accounts, because it's a 0th position, dot ID. It will work. But if you don't do this, right? Let's say, for instance, I decide not to do this. And if you assume that there will be a data, and for some reason, if select ID returns null, then it will fail, right? So it's a good practice to check. And also, if someone gives me code like this, for instance, right, or an insert or update operation, if they give me say just an example I wanted to show you. This is a list, right, and I'm doing say contact, right, C equals to, because I'm doing a contact object. I just wanted to tell you what I'm trying to do. Don't worry about the contact. Just an example I want to show. Contact.name equals to, say, test, and c.account, because we have an account ID. Okay, now we have my accounts, right? Because we assume, right, there will be something, right? And then you do something like, okay, insert C. So what I'm trying to do is that I'm actually creating a contact object, and I'm actually assigning a test to the name, and I'm assigning the ID to it. If someone gives me this code, right, I will be very annoyed, because where is the error handling in this code? This is a garbage code, right? Because it is where are you recording? So if something fails, how do I know it fails, right? So the first thing when I started programming back in the days, the first thing my mentor taught me: if you are not doing error handling, then your code is shit. Sorry for the bad language, but yeah. So you put under try and have some kind of error handling. I mean, you can write your own, but I'm just saying, let's say, I mean, some kind of basic error handling. Even if you're trying to do some basic error handling, that's fine. I mean, and but if you're not doing any sort of error handling, then it might fail. Then you wonder what's happening. So right, so these are one of the coding things you need to keep into consideration, right? So this is I'm very picky on this kind of things. When I do code review, if someone does the code, I clearly fails the code. I said no, it's not going to go into production. It's not going to happen. So if I mean, you don't have to put try cache for everything. You need to know when to put it. But if you have some like an insert, I expect that things can go wrong. So it's always better to cache the exception, right? Okay, cool, fantastic. So we have something called list. Then we have set. Set works similar to list, except you can't store duplicate. I can add duplicates to it, but the sets you can't. Then we have map. So maps are maps are my favorite, because I use maps a lot, but you need to use it based on the context, right? So maps are like key value pair. So if you are someone who came from C# background, you know C# has a concept called dictionary, T dictionary objects. So it is something similar to that. So we say val equals to new. You can do pretty complex stuff with the maps as well. So just string, right? So this is about maps. You can also do, if I say I wanted to pass a list of, you can do list of string if you want, right? You can do this. You can do something this as well. Oh, sorry. Okay. Right. You can do something this as well. All right. So pretty straightforward. Maps like key value pair. You can do nested if you're, you know, depending upon what are you trying to achieve. So that's something you do. So this is how you use the maps, right? So the collections are pretty handy. I use it. So then we have something called Visualforce, right? So Visualforce usually relies on MVC paradigm, right? So but right, because it's, and if you're someone who worked on you know, ASP .NET Web Form, you know, back in the days, right? I mean, I've done ASP .NET Web Forms. I know I didn't enjoy it at all because the code is clunky, it is messy, because it's used HTTP, right? So it's stateless, right? So you have to write all kind of markups. So then MVC came along. Now we have .NET Core. So it's great. Sorry, I don't want to digress. I don't want it to take you to C#, but yeah, I'm just comparing. So as you can see that they're comparing here as well. So this is something you write in a Visualforce. So it is standard controller, so which is linked to your standard object. So that's why you can hook up, you know, Visualforce. Say, I'll give you a very simple example, right? In a Salesforce, right? We have, just to give you a very simple example, let's go to, come on, account. So we have a list view, right? And if I, so this is a list view. So if I wanted to add a button here, right, next to new, you can do that using Visualforce, right? So the way to do it, so you create a basic Visualforce page. You have a standard controller, then you specify an action. Actions are like a method, right? It's usually your Apex method in a class you define, which returns a page reference. So so you normally define a button here, right? So how does the Visualforce page knows that it should belong to the account? So that's how this standard controller comes in the picture. You put account here, so you go to so what you do is that so you need to do some kind of settings, going to account object, then create a custom button. Then you have to go to Salesforce and then move the. I just don't want to get into details. So what I'm trying to say here is that so this standard controller links you to the object, right? So that's, and you can do all kind of CRUD operations. So, and you know, so, and one of the thing with the Salesforce, if you write a code, right, so you need to provide a unit test. Unit test means your code coverage should be at least 75% or above, right? And so it's very handy. I will show you later, later classes, how to do the unit testing. It's very important you do unit testing. Unit testing ensures that you have a better code coverage, and Salesforce do make sure that you don't put shitty code in the production, right? Because if your code is buggy, it can cause a performance issue or whatever, right? So right, so and yeah, so and as I said, that compared to .NET's Apex library is pretty smaller, so the learning curve is not too big compared to .NET. But yeah, I work with both with C# and as well as with Salesforce because we have different line of products. So sometimes, some days I work only with Salesforce, some days I don't touch Salesforce at all. I do mostly C# work. So yeah, that's life, right? If you're a technical consultant, you should know different languages. That's the expectation. All right, sorry, I digress. So we done this, right? So now you need to know something about execution context. Anyway, I talked about the way about debug logs, and I've showed you about the logs and executions, right? So not going to touch much on that. Asynchronous Apex, right? This is very important. You will be using, if you're a Salesforce developer, if you have to. So what happens is that, let's say you are I'll give you a very classic example. There's something which I did recently. Recently means yesterday. So we are integrating our Salesforce ERP with a third-party vendor, right? So I need to pull information from a third-party vendor. So I have to I have to pull close to 20,000 records, right? So what I have to, I mean, if I would have written a normal class, right, in a loop, it would have bombed out saying a circle image, right? And I have to schedule that thing. So what I have to do is that I have to rely on asynchronous operation, so that I don't care when it's done. I put in the batch and it does the job for me. And plus it's an API. So, right, I can't use it in a normal, loops. So that's where the asynchronous comes in the picture. So if you have to process a large number of data, then making callouts to external web services means that if you are using an API, right? Let's say Twitter has given you an API handler, right? If you are using a Twitter API to pull the data, right? So you need to use asynchronous operation here, and better and a good user experience as well. So, and the future methods are very handy, right? So future methods usually comes in the pictures when you're doing a call out. And so I've used future methods. So, and the problem with the future method is that you will not get any Apex ID, right? So when you run a future method, right? Because future method should be static and it should be void. You can't have a return type with it. So, and the future method do not support non-primitive data types, right? So you can't pass, let's say if I wanted to pass integer to my future method, right? Say, let me give you an example. So I have this method like public static void future, right? Okay, just an example. So at the rate future, right, call out equals to true. Right, now I can pass this, so I'll just show you. Let me get this boy out and this boy out, right? If I save this class, right, it will save because it shouldn't be a problem, right? Now, let's say I wanted to pass integer x, right? If I do save, it will save. Now, let me pass a non-primitive object data type, right? HTTP response, hopefully. Let's see. Okay, we got an error. See, future method do not support parameter of type HTTP response because it's non-primitive type, right? So it doesn't work. So let me say if it work account, parameter of type account. So it doesn't work, right? So we can't use this kind of stuff there. And also, I can't specify, oh, let me return, say, string. It doesn't work. So this is, and you can't call future method inside the future method, so you can't really do chaining. So if I have another future method, right, I can't call it inside. So that's something they mention about here. So, and that's what I called about the parameters as well. Batch is exception. Batch, so if you wanted to process up to, less than 50 million, you can use batch. And this is how we define a batch, right? So this is, I'm sorry if it's a bit advanced. So if you're a Salesforce developer, you should know how to use a batch. So this is how it's actually implementing it. So I will get into what implements means in a so for now, don't worry about it. So this is a code syntax which you use for a batch, right? And this is how you call the batch. You can specify number of batches you want to run. So it will limit the number of queries in a batch. For instance, if you put 2, it will execute 2 queries. And then if you put, it's like, if you have 70 records, right? So if you put 2, it will have a batch of 35 or something. So you need to work out the best way, the problem I face, like even it's mentioned, is troubleshooting can be difficult. So what I normally do is that I often put system.debug, and then I have to go to I have to activate the debug logs and look at it. So it can be pain. So the best of two worlds, future and batch, right? So batch has limitation, future has limitation, right? So they took the best part of the future, they took the best part of batch and made it a queue, because you can use non-primitive type in queue, right? You can pass, as I said, like you can pass account, you can pass HTTP response, right? You can chain the jobs together and it returns the job ID. Fantastic, right? I used this one day before yesterday and I loved it. I mean, I've been using it, I've used it many times, but I'm just giving you context, right? I just used it on one of the project I mentioned, integration one. So yeah, I mean, it's very handy. So as a developer, you will be using it, but this is, sorry if it's a bit of an advanced concept. So just remember that we have asynchronous process. The reason we use asynchronous, if you want to process the big chunk of data set, then you run asynchronous, right? Debug, I talked about debug, the way you debug it. So you go here and it will run a log, system.debug, for instance, right? I'm just going to show you one very quick way. So test, right? This is an anonymous window. So click on this one, right? And you see this lot of information here. And to isolate your part of a code, just go to debug here, and you can filter it, and you can do a lot of stuff here, right? And so what happens is, one thing you have to be very careful, right? If you keep on running your debug logs, right, you might get a message next time when you open a developer console, or you have exceeded the limit, please clear the debug logs. So the way you can do it, so go to query editor, right? You type here, select ID from Apex log, okay? Now watch, enable this one, use tooling API, and execute it. So, and select it, and then go to delete. Select all of this and delete row. So that will clear up your logs from here. And for the other one, you need to go to the debug log. We have something in Ape. So if you go to setup here, where you actually can see the log when the process runs, right? So go to debug logs, and you can create a new, or if you don't want, you can actually edit this, and you can change the date. You see, one thing I tell you, say so put it today's, right? And this one I make it to 13th, right? You see it will complain. It will say can only be active up to 24 hours. So you need to have the expiry date to next day. So I can put it 7th. You can save it. So what happens is that every time you run a process, right, say batch process or a scheduled task, it will generate a log file here, and you can go and you see the log file. And I'm not sure if this will generate a log file. Let's see if it generates this log file, right? So let's see if it do something. Okay, so let's go here, refresh it. So it has generated a log file, and then you can view and download it. It will give you the similar information what happened, right? So because what happens is, right, you can't always run on an anonymous window, right? Because your sales, that is good for if you are a developer and want to execute troubleshoot stuff, but if you are deploying a solution to client place, they won't be going here and manually running it. So it will be, so if you notice some kind of issues, it's good to enable the log file, right? And then if you're done with the log file, if you think that is taking too much of your space, just go and delete all. It will delete it, right? You need to, depending upon the number of the log files created, so you can go and delete, right? So that's about we have about the Apex basics. I just wanted to next thing I wanted to briefly touch about the Aura components. I won't go into the details, just to give you an example about it. So you know, when you talk about Aura, Visualforce, right? Visualforce is mostly based on it's a page centric, right? So let me give you an example. You request a page, right? So user requests something. So it's the server that sends you the page in the form of HTML, and whatever you see on the screen is an HTML page. And then let's say you have a user interface, right, where you have to type in some information, submit. It actually goes and talks to the server for processing of that of the things you're doing on the page browser. So it's mostly server centric, or page centric, I would say. And whereas in terms of Aura, right, it's a form of bundles, right? So these are the things which you have a resource bundle, and whereas in Visualforce you have these your dot page and meta.xml, right? And so as I mentioned that, so when this is the example I was talking about. So you request a page, right, and it actually hits the server sends you the response. And then when you do some modification, it again goes back to the step number one, that it talks to the server for the step. But whereas in this case, what happens in Aura, right? When you request for an Aura component or an application, right? It's the server actually sends you the component bundle to the browser. And so what happens whenever you do any kind of browser stuff, right? It's the JavaScript behind that bundle who does the response for you, right? Instead of going and talking to the server. So it happens on the client side. So it's mostly, so any response, right, it's handled by a server for Visualforce, for Aura, except the data storage, all the basic stuff, right, all the the JavaScript on the client that gives you the response based, it handles your code, if you know what I mean. So so that's so you can okay, so if you, I would encourage you to go to the Trailhead and practice this. So I don't use Visual Studio Code much for Salesforce development, because we work on different orgs, and I prefer to work on the browser and get it done. I used Eclipse before, but I find Eclipse a bit slower. So I use Visual Studio, not the Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio. I use licensed version. So because we do custom big scale development for our other ERP product, which is written on C#. So all right, sorry, okay, I digress. So let's go to, so Aura components are, as I said, it's a single page, and Visualforce is page by page, So and one thing you have to understand, that Visualforce is based on MVC paradigm, but whereas bundle or component based is based on event driven paradigm. It's a lightning component, right? So when it, so as I said that in Visualforce, right? Visualforce, you should use Visualforce only if you think that there are no out-of-box components available in Lightning, and if your teams are highly skilled on Visualforce, yeah, please feel free to use Visualforce, because Salesforce won't gonna end the support of Visualforce overnight, because they know that there are a lot of legacy code up there. We use Visualforce sometimes. So Visualforce, yeah, if you it has a lot of out-of-box components. So yeah, but if you want something mobile ready, then I would encourage you to use the Lightning components, right? So yeah, and then this is something you can read about it if you wanted to know. So I just gave you a basic overview. And controllers. So we have controllers. So when we talk about the controllers, right, it's mostly on the server side on Visualforce, whereas in Aura it's on it's on client side. So you see, most of the controller code is written on Apex, on Visualforce. Controller is on Apex side. So then while writing your code, so as you can see here, it says Visualforce controller runs on server side, while Aura controller runs on client side. However, they can run on server side too. Visualforce are written on Apex, while Aura controllers are written JavaScript, and it can sometimes written in Apex as well. JavaScript is a very beautiful language. I like working in JavaScript. So right in Apex we have action. So here we have which returns a page reference. Sorry, in Visualforce we have action, which is mostly written on Apex and returns the page reference. Whereas in Aura, it's a JavaScript code. You can see that, right? You can read about it. So and so yeah. And they talked about methods in Visualforce and events in Aura, right? So I mean, I don't want to go much detail into at this because this is just a fundamental. We'll talk about Visualforce later. We will be doing much detail coding related to Visualforce. That's one of the things I'll have to cover, but not now because I don't want to confuse you guys. Just remember one thing. So what we done today, we covered the fundamentals, right? So we're done with the fundamentals. So we talked about Visualforce, we talked about Apex, we talked about Lightning. So I showed you a bit about collection and a bit about how to use the developer console. One more thing I wanted to tell you that if you guys don't like the white background, you can actually go and change to preferences, and you can change the editor theme. Let's say I want to keep the black background, right? You can choose this one, right? Up to you. And you can maximize it to get the. I mean, I really like developer console because you don't need to install anything. All you need is a browser, right? That's the advantage of Salesforce being on cloud. You don't have to maintain any of the infrastructure. Salesforce team does that by themselves, right? It's their headache. It's their problem. Yeah. So and your data is pretty secure as well. It's on cloud. So. So yeah, that's one of the thing about the the developer console. I like it, and if you get bored of the look and feel, you can change the theme, right? So what I do is that for different clients, right? We have different clients, so I change the theme for developer console because it makes my job a bit easier. Otherwise, imagine you have 3 windows open, then you won't know which one you're, right? So if everything looks the same, right? Okay. So as I mentioned that we talked about basic stuff, and I covered today about lists and maps and sets, and I showed you about how to write a code. And please remember, guys, do look after error handling, right? That's very crucial in a development environment. Sorry, if you're a developer, then you need to know your error handling very well, right? If you can't do error handling, then I'm afraid you need to go and learn that because you can't be a good developer if you don't know how to do error handling. Because I mean, when I moved to Salesforce, I mean, I've seen some of the codes, right? I mean, I was like, what they were thinking. This is how can someone write this? This is like a disgrace. I mean, this is an insult to software developer. If someone writes a shitty code, I mean, I understand if you're starting new, it's fine. But if you're an experienced developer, if you're writing this, then I'm afraid that you haven't learned anything, right? Because you need to. I mean, that's why I always rely on someone more experienced than me to learn from them, right? So that's great. So yeah, that's my perception. That's my opinion. So all right, I mean, you can have your own opinion, right? Okay. So we talked about a bit about Aura component, and so you guys should read this if you are preparing for platform dev. I would encourage you to read all this stuff, right, and do the questionnaire here and do the hands-on challenge because you guys need to do hands-on. This is very important because I'll be covering most of the stuff, but just to make your life easier. But that's not enough to do platform dev. You need to practice. That's practice. This is very, very important. You cannot pass the certification without practicing. Even if you pass the certification, it makes no sense, right? Because you will struggle when you work on an actual production, actual environment, right? Because client will give you a requirement. If you don't know how to code, if you don't understand the concept, that's not really good. So please practice, practice, practice. I can't emphasize enough. You need to practice, right? Sorry, I don't want to sound like a teacher, but just, you know, I want every one of you, succeeds when you apply for a platform development certification. You guys should feel confident, and then feel proud that, oh yeah, I've achieved it, right? So that's a great feeling to have. So I've covered the fundamentals, right? So I gave you a bit of understanding around what's the platform developer looks like, right? And what's the Salesforce platform is about. We briefly touched on Apex, and and I showed you a bit about SQL query as well. I just give you a glimpse of SQL query when I wrote select ID from Apex log, right? So tomorrow, next time, we will be talking about data modeling, which is a fantastic topic. I love data modeling. I'll show you a few tips and tricks. And then we have data management, then we have formula field. Amazing. The lightning, this is one of my favorite stuff, lightning. And we talk about database. We cover, we're going to talk about triggers. Triggers are very, very useful. If you're someone who came from database background, it's similar to that, but the concepts is pretty much similar, but it works a bit different in Salesforce, right? So we're going to talk about, all this stuff. So, right, we got a lot to cover. Just my main goal is to make you a great and awesome developer, so that we can write an efficient code on Salesforce, so that if someone looks at the code, they say, "Wow, it's impressive," right? So, right, okay, all right, guys, that's all I wanted to cover today. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you very much for attending today's session. And stay safe and have an amazing day. Bye.